On today's episode, something that lives on Facebook is killing people. I'm Jeremy Fisher. This is The Awakening. You might recall an episode of last season called Free Career Tools, Will Ferrell, My Dog, and the Media. I know, maybe not my best title. In that episode, we explored the concept that well-researched news isn't nearly as valuable today as quick news. Commoditized media and competition has driven news reporting to use a philosophy coined by a fictional character created by Will Ferrell. Ricky Bobby, played by Ferrell in Talladega Nights, lived by the mantra of, if you ain't first, you're last. If media outlets want to be the first to report a story, they'll probably have to sacrifice thoughtfulness and accuracy, which is resulting in the quality of our news deteriorating every day. And that's how terms like fake news are invented. But fake news isn't new. The term might be, but fake news is another way of saying propaganda. Today, with social media, propaganda travels so much faster. How dangerous is propaganda to a society? Well, let's take a quick quiz. In which of the following wars was fake news or propaganda or whatever you want to call it used to spread misinformation by the governments at war? The Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, or the Cold War? The answer is all of the above. History shows propaganda can be deadly. But that's all in the past, right? I mean, fake news isn't really hurting anyone today, is it?
USA! 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 Come on!
On January 26th, 2021, Brian Sicknick lost his life, in part because of propaganda. Brian was the police officer that was beaten to death by participants of the U.S. Capitol riot. What flags were being waved by the rioters? The American flag, Blue Lives Matter flags. Brian was a blue life, and he was a patriot. He was an American veteran, and he was beaten to death by the very people that he shared commonalities with. He was beaten to death with a flag. When this first happened, I didn't know what to do with it. It's too much for a person, much less a country to take. It took me weeks just to be able to process what happened. I, like many people, felt helpless watching chaos descend upon the foundation of a country that I live in and love. And then one thing struck me. Misinformation is still costing people their lives. It's not just allowing people to live in ignorance, to continue spreading hate, and to hide within the walls of their biases. It's actually costing lives. It's overwhelming, and it seems like it has to stop. It's a complicated problem, which means there likely won't be a simple solution. But it's important to make sure that we don't simply mourn the losses that our country experiences, but we also seek ways to improve it. So here's my tiny little contribution. Snopes needs to start a podcast. There's a good chance that you haven't heard the name Snopes in a long time, but you probably have heard of it. And that's why they need a podcast. Snopes was a very popular website back in the early 2000s. It rose to fame as a fact-checking website that would dispel urban myths and legends. And it grew into a site that still to this day debunks common propaganda. It's a site hundreds of millions of people are familiar with, but for some reason, Snopes sort of faded away from popular culture. Nobody really talks about it anymore, but it's still around. And I think it's time for it to make a comeback. And if you're looking for a lucrative side hustle, you might be the person to do it. Snopes already has brand recognition that companies pay millions of dollars to obtain. Most people you know of have heard of Snopes, and most people know that Snopes is a fact-checking website. In a world of misinformation, what service is needed more than Snopes? Here's the approach someone could take. Reach out to the folks who run Snopes and offer to host a podcast for them. The podcast could be supported by Patreon members rather than containing ads, because a fact-checking brand like Snopes needs to make sure they aren't ever in danger of being biased. If listeners of the show fund the show through Patreon, the Snopes podcast can remain unbiased with the news they cover. This is actually a model I'm looking at implementing for this podcast. I've purposefully not become an affiliate of anything that I promote on this show because I want to make sure that I don't appear to be playing favorites. More to come on that later. Each week, the Snopes podcast will tackle the most popular stories circling social media and provide the truth behind the story. With the number of fake social media stories growing by the day, there's going to be no shortage of content. In fact, Snopes already does this on their website, but few people actually go and look at it these days. The podcast will provide an easy-to-digest audio format and bring it to today's generation. When you arrange the deal with Snopes, I wouldn't ask for any money up front. I'd offer to host the show for free in exchange for a percentage of revenue created through Patreon contributions. That dramatically lowers the risk that Snopes would incur by launching this concept, and they don't have to pay money out of their pocket to get it started. Because people know about Snopes, it does have over 1 million followers across its social media channels. So if you converted 10% of those to podcast listeners, and just 5% of those people contributed $10 a month through Patreon, the show would gross $50,000 per month. That should leave plenty of room for you to get a piece of the pie, earn a healthy living, and provide an additional revenue model for an existing brand. And that's assuming the podcast only gets listened to by their current followers. If this podcast becomes popular, as I suspect it could, your income, along with the show's income, could easily turn into 7 figures. Not only would you earn a good living, you'll host a show with a well-known brand that you don't have to build yourself. You'll help Snopes bring in revenue from a completely low-risk project, and your podcast will make the world a better place. Maybe it could even save lives. The propaganda problem has been around for centuries. In 44 through 30 BC, Roman leaders Mark Antony and Octavian used propaganda to defame each other, which highly influenced Roman public opinion. Mongolian Emperor Genghis Khan used to send a small group of soldiers ahead of his army to spread rumors that his army was the largest in the world, which wasn't true. This propaganda would instill fear in opposing forces and allowed Genghis to conquer civilizations that were actually far more powerful. Today, propaganda still spreads fear, often leading people to make decisions they wouldn't otherwise make. A problem for humanity that's existed for centuries won't solve itself overnight. If you start a Snopes podcast, will you solve all the world's problems and change the course of humanity? Probably not. But this reminds me of the tale of the starfish. One day, an old man was walking along a beach where thousands of starfish had washed ashore. He noticed a young girl eagerly throwing the starfish back into the ocean. Puzzled, the man asked the girl what she was doing. She said, "I'm saving these starfish, sir." The old man chuckled. "There are thousands of starfish and only one of you. What difference can you make?" The girl picked up a starfish, gently tossed it into the water, and said, "I made a difference to that one." That's it for today's show. You can find more unique business ideas at theawakening.com. If opportunity doesn't come knocking, let's build a door.